Israeli forces killed dozens of Palestinians as the U.S. celebrates its new embassy in Jerusalem. I'm Imran Garda with a special edition of The Newsmakers examining the unrest between Israel and the Palestinians.
I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
נשיא טראמפ, אתה ידיד גדול של מדינת ישראל, וכולנו מודים לך.
انتهاك صارخ للقانون الدولي والاتفاقات الموقعة.
Benjamin Netanyahu has had a roller coaster of a relationship with Washington during his 10 years in office. President Obama was once caught on a hot microphone bemoaning the fact that he had to deal with the Israeli Prime Minister on a daily basis. Today, the dynamic between the U.S. and Israel has radically changed. The U.S. Embassy now stands in Jerusalem, bolstering Netanyahu's controversial claim on the city as Israel's undivided capital. And at a time when Germany and the UK are pushing for an investigation into the killings of more than 60 Palestinians, the US has proven itself Israel's loyal defender. Donald Trump has blamed the Gaza killings on Hamas, and his UN ambassador praised Israel for showing restraint. But why? Such moves further isolate Washington from the rest of its allies. So, how does this relationship benefit the White House? That debate in a moment. But first, here's Randolph Nogel with The View from Jerusalem.
We and Israelis all know that Jerusalem has been and will be our eternal capital.
The United States, by accepting Jerusalem as the unified capital of Israel, is practically joining Israel in violating international law.
Trump came in and broke the table. There is no table. You cannot put the sides into one room in the existing circumstances.
A moment of great pride for many Israelis and deep sorrow for many Palestinians.
On behalf of the 40...
With the U.S. Embassy move to Jerusalem now official, the U.S. role as peace mediator is now more dubious than ever, as is Donald Trump's promise to make, quote, the ultimate deal.
He positioned himself as an unbalanced mediator. Palestinians declared that they will not allow him or his administration to mediate, and we declared, Israel, that we will not allow another mediator. If you need more, I'll give you.
Alon Liel was one of the first people to be born in Israel.
I was born in Tel Aviv, half a year after the country was founded, so I'm approaching 70 myself.
He went on to a career in diplomacy and says, 70 years on, Israel has a mixed legacy.
Israel is a success story, even an amazing success story. But there is a but. Ben-Gurion used to say, he said, we are not founding a normal country. For us, it will not be enough to be a successful normal country. We found a country that will be or lagoim. It's in Hebrew. I will first translate. Light to the nations. With the occupation especially, we are not light to the nations.
Alon is among the minority of Israelis who now support a two-state solution. The Trump administration has emboldened Israel's right-wing government in its effort to consolidate control over all of Jerusalem.
I do think that President Trump deserves special tribute, a modern-day Cyrus.
Chaim Silberstein founded Keep Jerusalem, a public diplomacy and advocacy organization to ensure that all of Jerusalem stays under Israel's control.
The dam waters of construction and expansion of Jerusalem have opened, in my opinion, not enough yet.
In Palestinian areas of the city, there is a deliberate growing Israeli presence.
Sheikh Jarrah is one of the areas in occupied East Jerusalem where Jewish settlers are moving in.
They're intent on making sure that this land is never given over in any future peace deal. We met Shlomi Coleman at a Jewish Orthodox festival. He says he was the first from his community to move back into Sheikh Jarrah 20 years ago.
First of all, Jews lived here before 1948. Basically, the Jews are coming back to live here in their houses. There is no takeover or occupation.
But while Israel's government supports Jewish settlers moving into Palestinian areas, it doesn't allow Palestinians to return to the homes they were forced from 70 years ago.
It all goes back to the very basic question. Are we all equal human beings or not?
Shuafat refugee camp is one of the many areas on the other side of the wall where Palestinians live in limbo. But there's a special reason why this camp is so overcrowded. It lies within the municipal limits of Jerusalem, giving residents the right to work in Israel. While Israel's government is working to consolidate a larger Jewish presence in occupied East Jerusalem, there are plans to cut areas like this off from the city.
My organization wrote policy which we submitted to the government, which has been accepted and in fact entrenched in Israeli law, that these areas should be ceded from Jerusalem, disconnected from the municipality of Jerusalem, and separate municipalities established where they will have budgets, mayors, administration, police stations, totally for their benefit.
But people are afraid that being cut off from Jerusalem will only further marginalize them.
We don't want anything from them, but to have our land back. And we wish to sleep comfortably, just like they do. We don't want anything else. We don't want money or buildings or villas. The most important thing that we are looking for is to have peace of mind.
Layla's only birthright was her refugee status. She was born in Shuafat. She built a salon business in her home to provide for her family. A garden with animals provided a place for her children, and now her grandchild, to relax and play.
There are no playgrounds nor gardens inside the camp. That's why I mentioned, the place I live is so small, and there are no other places for my kids to play other than outside on the street. My father also loved gardening. We Palestinians love to grow things.
But with little pressure on Israel's right-wing government for concessions, Layla's dream to return to her family's land may be now even further from becoming a reality. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers in Jerusalem.
Let's bring in our guests from West Jerusalem. We have Alon Liel, the former Director General of Israel's Foreign Ministry. Daniel Seideman, he's the Director of the Israeli NGO Terrestrial Jerusalem. And writer and Middle East analyst Seth Frantzman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Daniel Seideman, after this embassy move, what does your gut tell you? Prospects of peace and justice in Israel and the Palestinian territories, they are what?
The prospects are nil for the foreseeable future. The United States has disqualified itself as the steward of political processes since 1967. Virtually the exclusive platform for addressing the core issues between Israelis and Palestinians was under American leadership since the Rogers Plan. The United States is clearly weighed in as a partisan. The United States is gone as a broker in this conflict. They will not be back anytime soon, and there's no replacement. And the ultimate destabilizer in Jerusalem is hopelessness, and hopelessness is as thick as I can ever recall.
Mm-hmm. And Seth Frantzman, this seems to be a deal for the Israel of the settlers, the U.S. of the evangelicals, and not many others in between. Is that accurate?
Well, I think the embassy move is a good deal for all of Israel. I mean, Israel's capital has been in Jerusalem since 1948. So I think that even in the 1950s, you had several other countries that had embassies in Jerusalem. And you have other countries like Russia that recognize West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So I think it's about a lot more than that. I think it's about Israel, it's about America. And I think in the end of the day, it will also be good for peace.
And Seth, given that besides Guatemala and a couple of others, nobody else is recognizing it, Everybody else sees it as problematic and illegal. Does that not bother you?
I think a lot of other countries have said actually the opposite. They've said once there's a peace deal, it's certainly not illegal. Many other countries say that basically they're totally open with recognizing West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. They just like to see a peace deal. So I think that it may be, of course, problematic, but I think that most countries will eventually come around, and eventually there will be a peace deal, probably with the Israelis and the Palestinians. Hopefully in the near future, but if not in the near future, eventually.
Okay, so let's ask the former Director General at the Foreign Ministry, Alon Liel. This is unfolding in the year 2018 on the 70-year anniversary of Nakba for Palestinians, independence for the Israelis. Are you as optimistic as Seth Frantzman? He seems to think everything's going swimmingly.
No, I'm very pessimistic. I think this American move is one-sided. Too early. We saw the result 2 days ago with 60 Palestinians killed on the border. I think it ruins the chances for an agreement, ruins the chances for peace. And I think the international community, the rest of the international community, especially Europe, should speak up and say what they think about this move. Unfortunately, this is not happening, and I agree with Daniel. Things are stuck, very depressing. Israel is celebrating, Palestine is humiliated, and the bigger this gap between the Israeli celebrations and the Palestinian humiliation, the more violence we'll see and the less possibilities for talks.
Interesting that you put it that way. Israeli celebrations and Palestinian humiliation. Daniel Seidemann, when you saw the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, defend Israel's actions in Gaza, and it's hard to separate out the embassy move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and the violence we're seeing on the border in Gaza, when she said no country in this chamber at the Security Council would act with more restraint than Israel has. How do you feel about that?
I think there's a connection between that statement and the move of the embassy. And the message that the United States and the Trump administration is sending to the Palestinians is Israelis matter, Palestinians don't. Palestinian lives don't matter. I'm a retired major in the Israeli Army Reserves. I'm proud of my military service, and I'm ashamed of the way that this is being handled. Haven't we heard of crowd control? Is the only measure the lethal measures? Is it conscionable that there will be 1,300 people on one day suffering wounds from live fire? Haven't we heard about water cannons? I'm deeply disturbed by this, and I think it is only fanning the flames and sending the message to the Palestinians, abandon all hope.
Seth Frantzman, would you agree that there's a massacre taking place in Gaza?
I think large numbers of people were shot with live ammunition, and I think since March 30th, about 110 or 120 have been killed. So I think that Israel should examine that. I think the Israeli High Court was actually had a petition by human rights organizations to look at that. And it's unfortunate, actually, the High Court has not come down with a ruling. And it's unfortunate that there's not been some more discussion, I think, in the media in Israel and also in the government circles about whether or not this has been handled the best way for the last 8 weeks. I think that Israel had plenty of time to prepare for what happened on May 14th. And it appears to be that probably not enough preparation or thought was given to what was going to happen that day.
Doesn't it make it easier, Seth, given that the U.S. has given Prime Minister Netanyahu and the IDF a blank check to do whatever the hell they want to do? So why be self-critical? Why need to examine? You've got the superpowers backing.
Well, I think if you saw today, the Trump's representative, Jason Greenblatt, is actually in Qatar, in Doha, meeting today with Qataris to talk about the Gaza situation and talk about peace. And I think you're going to see actually the Trump administration will put forward a peace plan. And it will be up to Israel, of course, and the Palestinians to talk about that. But it's quite clear that if you look from Jason Greenblatt's Twitter account and the recent public statements that he's written and published in Arabic media, that they seem to be serious about doing something soon in terms of putting forward a peace concept.
Alon Liel, tell me why you don't trust them with a peace plan.
I think the United States and the President Trump have disqualified themselves as potential mediators. The Palestinians said they will not have them as mediators, and Israel said they will not have any other mediator. They will not allow any other mediator. So we don't have a mediator. And the question is not if we have partners, we don't even have a table. So we are very far away from any talks. And I don't think the one-sided American administration has the right to put on the table a plan after they moved the embassy to Jerusalem. But I want to say something about the shootings. Beyond the issue of the killings, the human rights aspect of it, it is foolish on behalf of Israel to behave in such a way, because this is again triggering international criticism that didn't exist in the last 18 months since Trump was elected, or since the December 2016 2334 UN Security Council resolution. The world was completely silent, and because of the Trump backing, nobody challenged it. And now it's coming up again, the comparisons of the 14th of May to the 21st of March in 60 in Sharpeville, South Africa. The world apartheid is coming back. The world trigger happy is coming back. And why it was a mistake also from this respect to a power, a regional power like Israel, that can steal the nuclear archives from Tehran and bring it to Israel, right, and destroy the nuclear ability of Iraq and Syria, can handle demonstrations in a different way.
Yeah, something interesting from 1950 from Sharpeville, that now that you mention it, is that the apartheid South African government had actually said that militants were sending innocent women and children to the front line to be massacred. Danny Seidemann, let me ask you about the status of Jerusalem then. This is your speciality. Here we are, where the United States has moved its embassy. We've got other countries like Guatemala, for example, following suit. Is there in your lifetime the prospect of a Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem?
I believe that that is an existential imperative for the viability of the State of Israel, and I fear that I will not live to see it. This evening is the beginning of Ramadan, and 40% of Jerusalem will be fasting Palestinian Muslim Arabs, and they are politically disempowered. They're disenfranchised. You have two national collectives at the epicenter of a regional and global conflict, one of which has all of the political power and the other does not. Jerusalem is not a sustainable city. It is a binational city. It is a divided city. It is a contested city, and the hollow gesture of unveiling a plaque on a building by the United States does not make it less contested, less divided, more sustainable.
Okay, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Seth Franzman, Alon Liel, and Daniel Seidemann, thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Welcome back to this special edition of the Newsmakers. Palestinians are burying dozens of their 60 dead who've been killed by Israeli snipers during protests at the Gaza border. Many in the news media reported that the demonstrations were sparked by the US embassy moving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But that only explains a small part of the grievances held in Gaza, since 700,000 Palestinians were forced from their homes in 1948. Randolph Nogel went to Gaza to see how 3 generations of one family has lived without freedom.
يوم النكبة كانت يوم حصيدة وبنحصد في قمح لهم لا يسع ما كانش حد معه سعاد.
Suleiman Abu Namus may be the oldest man alive in Gaza. He doesn't know exactly how old he is, but he says He has memories of Palestine under Ottoman rule, which ended a century ago.
عندي 110 115 لأنه حاضر تركيا أنا، والكنكو قريت التاريخ بتصدقوا على كلامي تسألوا التاريخ. عشت مع تركيا 10 سنوات.
In 1948, on the day of the Nakba, or Day of Catastrophe, he fled his village to the east of Gaza, today known as Beit Shava in Israel. Suleiman lived in Egypt for 15 years after he was forced from his home in Palestine.
لو بدي أعيش كمان 100 بنساش مطرحي. لو بدي آكل عسل برا وآكل هانا ملح، الملح بستطعم بيه عن العسل برا. والله نفسي قبل لا أموت أشوفها بس أقعد فيها ساعة وأموت.
Suleiman's son, Mohammed, works as an orthopedic surgeon in Gaza. He's been busy. Thousands of people have been injured over the course of 6 weeks of protests at Gaza's northern border with Israel.
There's a high price to pay for protests in Gaza. Lifeless and maimed bodies have arrived here from the border, killed and injured by Israeli snipers.
Rami Hijazi was at the first Friday protest on March 30th.
ففي طفل أصيب على الساعة كان قريب من السلك وتصاوب، فدخلت أطوله وأنا داخل عليه أطلق النار علي، أصابني في قدمي من تحت. حملت الطفل ورجعت، وأنا راجع فيه بحط فيه على الشيالة أصابني كمان طلق الآخر.
مش بس حي ومتفجر، يعني الرصاصة بتدخل بتعمل اكسبلوسيف جوا في الجسم نفسه and the body. أثناء ما بيشوف اللي هو الطفل وهو ممدد قدامه على اللي هو طاولة العملية بيحس إنه هذا كأنه ابنه، تألم من داخله، لكن ما العمل ما فيش. يعني أنا لما بشوف طفل بتألم بصير أتوقع إنه أطفالي ممكن يكونوا في هذا المكان.
Mohammed was able to get medical training in Russia, and he practiced in Egypt. But he returned to Gaza, where he's most needed.
اليوم الظروف أصعب، يعني سابقا كان نوعا ما، يعني على الأقل كانت الأمور مفتوحة أمامنا في قصة العمل وإلى آخره. اليوم الأمور أكثر ضيق.
Often described as an open-air prison, Gaza is sealed off. Its young people cannot reach beyond its borders for opportunities. The only thing that is passed on to the next generation is refugee status and the politics of resistance. Suleiman's grandson is also named Mohammed. He's gone to the protests since they started. He often sleeps there, coming home every few days to change his clothes.
حياتي كلها قلق حوام، بسمع صوت إسعاف بزيد التوتر عندي، يعني ما بطمن إلا لما بيجي بشوفه أو أرن عليه ويكلمني وأسمع صوته.
Mohammed's mother wants him to return to university.
محمد جدع وجد حاله راجل، بس الدنيا شوية لعبت فيه ويمكن انظلم في هالدنيا في معتركاتها للحياة، أو بإنه توجه نوعا في وقت معين لاتجاه معين هيك بتطلع كيف؟
صح إنه أنا يعني ببقى زعلان لو انا فقدتك او انت فقدتيني، ولكن هذا برضه واقعنا وهذا اللي احنا يعني الشيء اللي كتب علينا ولازم ايش نواجهه. فهي كانت رسالتي يعني للحاجه والد.
Mohammed and his companions say that they are protesting peacefully and that the Israeli military has been the aggressor.
بدينا نلم كوشوك، صرنا اللي هو هدفنا من الكوشوك مش انه يعني نعمل ونضر ونعمل وهيك، لا، ولكن هدفنا منه ان نعمل ساتر ما بيننا وبين القناصة اللي بتنتهج سياسة القتل في الشباب تقنصهم في رؤوسهم.
Mohammed says even if he's shot, he will return to protest if he's able.
فإذا الاحتلال إن شاء الله يعني بنزاح وبيطلع من أرضنا من وين ما أجا بيطلع، بيكون هذا المستقبل يعني فتح مصراعيه للشباب يعني وبتتحقق كل أمل الشباب. اليوم نتنفس تقريبا يعني اللي هو نسائم عبير هوانا من داخل أراضينا.
That was Randolph Nogel there in Gaza. Well, as Gaza erupted, there were also protests across the West Bank, which is under the nominal control of the Palestinian Authority headed by Mahmoud Abbas, but still under military occupation by Israel. Earlier, I went to Ramallah and caught up with a young Palestinian activist and 2 Palestinian politicians. I asked them if Trump's embassy move has changed the dynamics of the conflict for them and if the Palestinians were now on their own. Abdallah, Mariam Barghouti and Mustafa Barghouti are with me. Let's get straight into it, Dr. Abdallah. You're part of the decision making. You're at the table here within the PA. How much responsibility does Palestinian leadership have for where we are now with the United States moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
I don't think the Palestinian leadership has any responsibility for the change of mind in the American administration. This administration even did not follow the line of the previous administrations concerning the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. No doubt that since the beginning of involvement of the United States after Oslo, those who are in charge of following the peace process from the American side have in mind managing the conflict rather than solving the conflict. But still, they cannot ignore international law, they cannot ignore international legitimacy through the United Nations Security Council resolutions. They never condoned the continuation of Israeli settlement building, they never condoned the attacks on the Palestinian movement, infringement on the rights of the Palestinians. This American administration is different on all aspects. This administration came with those who are following the extreme right wing of Israeli politics, the fascist line of Israeli politics from the American administration, and they put them in charge of trying to find a solution. So any solution comes from this group will not be in line with international law or with international legitimacy or with the previous traditional American administration's position.
So, Mariam, as a younger Palestinian living here in Ramallah, does that timeline check out for you? It was better under the previous administrations. The Palestinian leadership doesn't bear responsibility for this. It's all about Trump.
Right. I completely disagree in a sense that the American administration has always been very clear in its position towards Israel. It's been more dormant, and now it's out and overt in their relationship with Israel. They're very outspoken about it, very supportive of it, but it's also, you have to keep in mind that everything Trump is doing now had its infrastructure already laid out by the failure of Palestinian leadership to take into account Palestinian demands, by the failure of any international community to adhere to international law, to place pressure on Israel. In the end, Israel was treating Jerusalem like its capital long before the Trump declaration.
Right. Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, where are we right now? Are we at rock bottom for Palestinian statehood and aspirations? There's a big party happening in Jerusalem. The Israelis are getting international legitimacy from the superpower that is Jerusalem's their undivided capital. It's finished, it's done, isn't it?
No, it's not. And while I do hold the United States administration and Israel responsible for this criminal act, which is a violation of international law, and they're both participating in a war crime of accepting to annex occupied territories by force, I think it's a transformation period. I think the Palestinians now realize how mistaken the previous leadership was in accepting Oslo Agreement, at least without even insisting that the settlements should be stopped immediately. I think people understand now that the leadership was deceived by relying on the American administration as a mediator and by relying on negotiations only. I think what you see today is a transformation in Palestine. You see it in Gaza, you see it in Jerusalem and West Bank, of a new Palestinian strategy that has to be adopted. It is adopted at the popular level, and the leadership has to move in that direction, or otherwise they will lose everything. And the new strategy is to concentrate on changing the balance of power through popular resistance, through boycott, divestment, sanctions, through creating unity again between Palestinians, and through steadfastness. Yes, Israel has displaced 70% of the Palestinians in '48. Yes, they are now announcing Jerusalem as their capital, but they are now admitting that the number of Palestinians, after all this oppression for 70 years, the number of Palestinians here is bigger than the number of Israeli Jewish people. We are here, we're not going anywhere, and we will resist.
Abdullah, have you been out of touch? Have you and Abu Mazen and everybody been out of touch and naive maybe, trusting the Americans? Hey, you're an honest peace broker here. We can treat you as an impartial observer. Were you naive? Do you feel any regret?
I don't think that was the case. It was not the Americans, but it was the quartet that was created in 2002 to follow on the peace process. The quartet was also governed by respecting the international law. The quartet was also guided by the previous resolutions of the Security Council concerning the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But then it's the Americans who dominated the quartet. That's the fault of the quartet, to allow them to do so. Now, many of them tried sometimes to correct the stand of the Americans. Many statements were stopped by the quartet because they were biased, they were reflecting only the American stand. But still, the Americans could not do, during the quartet time, they could not do what they want as this administration is doing. Take, for example, Resolution 465 against the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. It was supported by the American administration in 1980.
Yeah, but there's one just hanging over my shoulder right now in Ramallah. So, I mean, ultimately, none of that helped, right?
But at least there is a stand. The Israelis could deceive the international community. There was no strong action to deter the Israelis from doing what they are doing to destroy the peace process. But this administration is coming to share with the Israelis, to put a shoulder to the Israeli policies and do what the Israelis want them to do. That's the difference. And it is not the blame of the Palestinian leadership, but rather the blame of the international community that does not defend the rules upon which the peace was built after the Second World War.
Okay, so Miriam, you have what Mustafa Barghouti also said is a transformation. What's happening on the street versus maybe what was happening with the leadership. So if we can take, for example, what's happening with the border fence in Gaza as the street, whether you believe Hamas is driving it or not, versus negotiations, what's closer to what Palestinians want, ordinary Palestinians?
It's definitely the Gaza situation, and I would disagree that I don't think it's transformative or new. This is something that has been ongoing for decades. You know, Palestinians have been protesting for decades. They had the same demands, the demands to return, the demands for decolonization, for liberation, for dignity. It's not new. And it's the closest echo to Palestinians. It's empowering, it's reclaiming our narrative, our voice, our agency, opposed to placing faith in a leadership that has constantly failed us, and in the US administration that is built on its own colonial past.
What if, Mustafa Barghouti, there's a silver lining here? We saw what Trump is managing to do with North Korea, for example. It's possible that even though he might be aligning himself with a lot of ideologues wherever for his policy, he's a maverick, he's enigmatic, he's pragmatic, he's a deal maker. Maybe, for example, if the new US embassy is in West Jerusalem, might that mean that there's a greater prospect for a Palestinian state with a capital in East Jerusalem?
That is not only wishful thinking, it's more than that. It's totally naive. to think so.
Tell me why.
First of all, because what Mr. Trump signed is the Congress decision that the unified Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, which includes East Jerusalem. This philosophy is, or this approach is the one of those who don't want to do anything about it, or who don't want to resist it, or who want to stay in that horrible line of let's concentrate only on negotiations and on the United States, and maybe they will change their mind. Everything relates to the balance of power, which has to be changed. And this is not Trump alone. This is the evangelical community in the United States. This is the conservative Republican Party siding with Israel. This is a whole structure that is becoming Zionist. And practically his whole team is Zionist.
Right.
I mean, they can be identified as spokesperson for Israel, not for the United States. So in my opinion, no, there is no hope out of this. The only way is to confront them. The only way is for Palestinians to resist. The only way is for us to go into struggle and to change the balance of power. And we will do it, and the people will do it. Of course, the Palestinian leadership has to give up its hesitation. For instance, they have now an opportunity to respond to Trump. Tomorrow, they should immediately refer Israeli leaders to International Criminal Court. That was promised for 2 years, but never happened.
Right.
They should immediately join the 22 organizations that Trump doesn't want us to join. We will put him in a difficult position. We have to fight, we have to struggle, and not to wait for good things to come out of the bad thing.
Dr. Abdullah, optics-wise, while all of this was happening, the last I saw of Abu Mazen was him kicking a football in Santiago. Is the leadership not grabbing hold of the situation and using the opportunity to get the international community on the side of the Palestinians?
The leadership has its position declared since 6th of December last, when Trump announced his decision to consider United Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The leadership was very vocal, very clear, and this is what galvanized the Palestinian grassroots with the leadership in opposing this decision, resisting this decision to the maximum we can. And all our movement is to gather support for our stand. Abu Mazen, our president, went to the Security Council on the 20th of February. Before that, he went to the European Union in Brussels. Before that, he went to the African Union in Addis Ababa. He went to the Arab Summit in Tehran.
So you've listed a bunch of it. So because we're running out of time, if you don't mind, and I apologize for interrupting, I want to give the final word to Mariam. Mariam, young Palestinian, is that enough for you? Do you think it will make a difference? Our final thought on this.
I think any approach that we have needs to go and transcend beyond this defeatist mentality that we have. It started with asking for Jerusalem as our capital, then it's East Jerusalem, and we keep giving these concessions. It is time to listen to the people on the ground. It is time to be brave enough to take our internal criticism and move forward, because what is essentially happening in Gaza, what is happening in the streets of the West Bank, what is happening in Haifa and Jaffa is Palestinians saying we can do better together and that we can move forward in our struggle. And it's time to do that. It's time to move our focus from what the US administration is doing, from what Israel is doing, and to really take a look at ourselves and empower ourselves. And that also means criticizing ourselves and our leadership.
Okay, it's been wonderful talking to all of you. Abdullah, Mariam Barghouti, Mustafa Barghouti, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that was the view from Ramallah. Let's look now at the global reaction to the US Embassy move and the latest violence in Gaza. In Tel Aviv, we have Arsen Ostrovsky. He's an international human rights lawyer and Middle East analyst. In Amman, Palestinian journalist and Middle East expert Dawood Kutab. And with me here in the studio is Selim Atalay. He's a Turkish journalist and commentator for 24 TV in Istanbul. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Arsen, let me start with you. Condemnation in its own right for the US Embassy move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. People have their opinions on that. A lot of people upset about that. But then in the aftermath, continuation of the violence in Gaza, the Israeli army killing unarmed protesters. Scores of them killed, couple thousand injured. Isn't that condemnable?
Israel will never apologize for taking whatever action necessary to defend our citizens, to defend our borders. We have to put this in context. This is no peaceful protest. This is a premeditated campaign of violence by the Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization sworn to Israel's destruction. Only a month ago, Yahya Sinwar, the head of the Hamas, said we will tear down the border and we will tear out their hearts from their bodies. This is who Israel is dealing with. Now, today, we just found out from the Hamas themselves that 50 of the 62 of those killed in Gaza were members of the Hamas. So I think this ought to put to rest any sort of pretext that this was any kind of peaceful protest. This was a premeditated act of violence, and Israel did what any sovereign nation would do in the circumstances. It took the steps necessary to defend our borders and to defend our citizens.
Okay, so Arsene, I'm looking at all the different institutions that had condemned the killings over the past few days. The United Nations, Amnesty International, Save the Children, Human Rights Watch, even the United Kingdom and EU countries, usually allies of Israel, saying, this is wrong. You shouldn't be shooting at these protesters, even if they are rushing the border. Turkey asking Eitan Nair, the ambassador, to leave the country. Are all of these institutions and countries being duped by Hamas? Or maybe do you have a problem?
No, I would say actually many of them are being duped by the Hamas and falling for the Hamas spin. Many of them have said that these were innocent protesters, and we know now for a fact that 50 of these were at least Hamas terrorists that were killed. So this was no peaceful protest. Unfortunately, much of the international community, when it comes to Israel, is very quick to rush to condemn Israel for taking action to defend itself. But where is the international outrage against Hamas? Where is the outrage that Hamas is using children as human shields? Where is the outrage that the Hamas are trying to infiltrate our borders? Can you imagine for a second what would have happened had their attempts to infiltrate been successful? There are 3,000 to 4,000 civilians living in the south of Israel. It would have been a catastrophe had it succeeded. I wish the international community could exercise
but that's a
more
hypothetical
balance when it comes to this matter.
That's certainly a hypothetical, and a lot of those people are too dead to defend themselves or to give us their intentions because they've been shot dead or they've been maimed, right? Selim, is Turkey falling for Hamas spin by deciding to...
Hamas themselves declare it today.
Okay, but I mean, we're talking about, eating of livers and ripping out of hearts and stuff. I mean, I know you're an intelligent man. I doubt you feel that that might be literal from Yahya Sinwar. Nevertheless, let's go to Selim. Selim, is Turkey wrecking its ties with Israel because it's falling for Hamas spin?
No, Turkish people just saw civilians getting shot regardless. Israeli snipers targeting the civilians with perfect clear shots, and they're pretty good shots, I have to admit. And we have seen just very consistent massacre attempt by the Israelis. We have seen press, our colleagues getting targeted and bullets ricocheting from their flak jackets. So no, it's unexplainable and undefendable.
And so is it worth Turkey saying, listen, Israel, you don't get to be our friend anymore?
I think we are beyond that point. We are beyond the crisis point, and Turkey just says something needs to be done, and Turkey is holding the summit this Friday with the Islamic Conference countries in Istanbul. So joint reaction towards whatever is happening in Gaza and West Bank.
Dawood Kutab, what do you make of the international reaction? Do the Palestinians have many friends? We spoke about Turkey's reaction. Do the Palestinians have many friends when it comes to the response to the embassy move and what's happening in Gaza?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's important to have friends or not, but it's important to be on the right side of history. And certainly the Israelis are not on the right side of history because of their actions against unarmed civilians, whether their heart is with Hamas or whether their heart is with Fatah. Hamas won the majority of elections, so many people support Hamas. That doesn't mean that they are worthy or they deserve to be killed because a soldier with sniper guns decides he's a judge, jury, and executioner, and he decides who gets to live and who gets to die. That's not how humanity works. And what happened in Gaza is a crime of war. And anything less than that is not telling the truth. Now, spin, the only people who are doing the spin are the Israelis, trying to say that the soldiers were in self-protection. How many Israelis were injured? Do you know? How many Israelis were killed? How many soldiers were injured? 0. So if they were so much in danger, how come nobody was injured? Not a scratch has happened to the Israelis, yet we've had thousands of people injured and killed. So I think the Israelis are on the wrong side of history. Some of the international community is standing up for justice. Some are being too political to stand up, and they're kind of being quiet. But it doesn't matter who stands up with the Palestinians. It matters where people stand in history.
Arsen, are you on the wrong side of history?
No, absolutely not. You know, I think the previous speaker spoke about the lack of casualties on the Israeli side, and I would ask, would it make people feel better if there were more Israeli casualties, more Israeli deaths? Absolutely not. It was by the grace of our defense forces that managed to successfully stop the penetration of terrorists seeking to cross the border and commit acts of terror and violence. We saw for a fact that these were not innocent protesters. It doesn't matter how many times you say that. We saw them lobbing Molotov cocktails. We saw them throwing IEDs. We saw them hurling stones. We saw them planting explosives. We saw them trying to break through the barrier. So once again, these were not innocent protesters. And Israel will do whatever action it must take in order to defend itself. And given the choice, we would rather the safety of our citizens than appeasing and pleasing the international community.
Can you say clearly and honestly that every death and every injury was justified?
Anytime there is a death, that is a tragedy. That is a horrible, horrible tragedy. But that is a sad consequence of war and violence, the situation we are in now. Israel targeted only and strictly those terrorists, those people causing harm. It is the Hamas who initiated this violence. It is the Hamas who brought innocent women and children. They bussed them. They paid for them to attend these riots. They're the ones that put them in this horrible, horrible situation. War is a terrible thing. Innocent people die, but the responsibility lies squarely with the Hamas who, one, initiated this violence, and two, put the innocent people in harm's way.
Dawood Kuttab.
Well, you know, there is a situation here where one side is powerful. Yes, the Israelis are powerful. They're drunk with power. And they are putting a siege on Gaza for 11 years. People in Gaza have no electricity, 4 hours of electricity. They have no jobs. And the Israelis continue to have the siege. And people, you know, hope that there will be peace one day. And then they see the Israelis celebrating, bloating, boasting about the U.S. moving its embassy to Jerusalem. And they say, where is the peace? Where is the horizon? Where is the political hope that we have? People see no hope. They see no horizon. They see no possibility of a peaceful process. So they're not happy to live anymore. This is the problem. You don't shoot against hopeless people. You try to understand them. You try to negotiate with them. You try to figure out what's happening. 70 years in which they have been waiting to return to their homes because the United Nations made the resolution saying Palestinians have a right to return. When Israel wanted to join the UN, they promised to respect the right of return. They promised to respect the partition plan, which said Jerusalem is a corpus separatum. It has to be separately resolved and managed. Yet Israel threw all that away, and they're boasting because of their power, because their buddy Donald Trump is supporting them. Okay, fine, they're powerful, they're drunk with power, but that doesn't put them on the right side of history.
Salim Atalay, Turkey driving this process, as you said,
yes.
It's called this OIC meeting. What do you want to come out of it?
Well, primarily, does Israel want, or will they allow an independent investigation of this? Beyond rhetoric and beyond the official lines and explanations, will there be an investigation of this independently? We don't think so. So, number two, the Islamic Conference meeting, similar meeting was held before the U.S. Embassy moved, right after the U.S. Embassy moved decision, and it might be a repeat of that. But of course, there's also a problem with the Muslim world when Turkey wanted to send ambulance planes to pick up some of the injured from Gaza. Israel and Egypt denied landing rights. So, yes,
right.
there is
yeah, the Israelis and the Egyptians both enforcing the blockade on Gaza, something that isn't to be forgotten. Let me ask you, on the subject of religion, Dawood Kuttab, the fact that a lot of U.S. evangelicals support this move and are in many ways part of Trump's base, pushing for this move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. As biblical prophecy, as a Palestinian Christian, how do you feel about that?
Well, you know, I'm a church-going Christian. I believe in my faith. And my faith doesn't make God a real estate agent. God doesn't give away land to one people or another. God is a just God. God doesn't allow injustice. And I don't think anybody supporting what Israel is doing is supporting what God wants. I think, God doesn't need the help of the evangelicals or anybody else to speed up his second coming. And, I'm really surprised that the Israeli Jews who are so excited about the evangelicals, because what the evangelicals are talking about is the return of Jews so that they can be massacred in Palestine, Israel. So I disagree totally with the interpretations of prophecy that the evangelicals are doing. And I think they are totally wrong by putting all their trust and support to a right-wing, thrice divorced man who lies every day and who's not even close to being a moral person. So there is nothing about this group that is religious. It's all political.
Okay. Dawood, Arsen, and Selim, I thank you all for your time. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. That's all for this special edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. We'll leave you now with another look at the controversial and deadly events that have transpired across Israel and Palestine over the past few days.